Thank you. Yeah, it's exciting to be here. I've enjoyed the prior presentations and that introduction as well, that just show how the sort of things that I love about this industry, right? The passion that people have for the industry, the enthusiasm, and just the commitment to sustaining it over a long period of time and growing and building the industry and pilots and all of the workforce and folks that are involved in making it so special. So thinking back to certainly the days that Craig and I were talking about, which is there's two things really that I have just passions and excitement for in my life. So technology and aviation. So the first part of my career was principally as a software developer. Until about 17 years ago when I was a pilot, I had this desire. I wanted my friends and family to be able to track my flights. It's that simple. I wanted to be able to do the same. And so I created FlightAware. And I was really fortunate to be able to combine those two passions, technology and aviation. But to be clear, I had no ambitions of creating a global company. There was no business motivation. My ambition and my goal was one thing: create an awesome website and a great service that pilots and aviators and people in aviation could benefit from. But I'll talk about how that success was really because of that motivation. I think that in addition to embracing the technology side, one advantage too of being a pilot is that flying around every day, I'm learning about not only about aviation, but coming up with new features, coming up with new ideas, and continuing to really feed that flywheel of innovation, and continuing to try to apply those same motivations and goals. So I'm going to provide a little overview about FlightAware and about digital aviation, also how it ties to the culture of aviation and to flight training. Many of you are probably familiar with the free FlightAware website and app that provides flight tracking for aircraft all over the world. And that's a huge part of who we are. So 15 million monthly users of that service, including most of our fellow pilots and their families. And we've got that not only in the US, but foreign equivalents all over the world. But beyond that, huge focus of the business and a lot of the growth lately has been providing operational flight tracking technology to aircraft operators. So about 225 airlines around the world use FlightAware's global flight tracking for decision making and for operating their airline networks. About 15,000 business jets use FlightAware for the same purpose. And then we recently expanded into a bunch of additional value-added services, things like blending our data and information into machine learning to predict arrival times. And so as of today, half of US airline flights are using our predictions for runway landing time and gate arrival time for things like gate allocation, gate and stand, for crew scheduling, for reservation management, and those sorts of things are pretty exciting to FlightAware to have that scale and impact. And so if you look at, you're flying United, you're flying Delta, and you see an estimated delay or early arrival on the flight board or on your mobile app, that's powered by FlightAware. Some of this may be new to you, and you probably wonder, what is FlightAware's focus and what is FlightAware's real tie to the industry? So I'll talk a bit about digital aviation and how we got here and what it is. So FlightAware was one of the first entrants into what's now called digital aviation. And it's really the practice of leveraging the technology in the tech world, right? So what's going on in Silicon Valley, what's going on in data science, and applying that to aviation. So it's businesses like flight tracking, like flight planning, electronic flight bags, so EFBs, like ForeFlight, predictive maintenance. It's those sorts of businesses. And in the case of FlightAware, we take the world's real-time and historical data, upwards of about 15,000 messages per second, and we create a single source of truth for decision making. That could be decision making for pilots, that could be decision making for your spouse picking you up, it could be for an airline dispatcher, it could be for an FBO, but it's trying to leverage data science to make aviation more reliable. But I want to be clear, the value that digital aviation is bringing, FlightAware is bringing, it's not aggregating all this data and giving it to you, it's the data science and creating a platform that lets others extract the useful single source of truth and information that helps them make those decisions accurately. So here's an example of kind of applying that. About 5 years ago, we started reaching diminishing returns on improving our flight tracking coverage, right? We had it all over the US, we had it all over the world. And we started to say, well, what's next? Where are people experiencing problems? Where are airlines experiencing delays? Well, by and large, the confusion, whether it be at business aviation or airlines, it's on the ground and typically pre-departure, right? That's where you have a lot of delays. That's where there's a lot of communication issues. So we had a new exciting initiative, which is we wanted to expand into surface movement. That's tracking airplanes on the ground. This is a new frontier for general aviation in particular, and it opened up a lot of really cool opportunities. So we upgraded all of our thousands of ground stations around the world to decode ADS-B positions on the ground. And instead of backhauling into our servers, a few times a minute, like we do for airborne flights, we said, well, let's backhaul them at 1 per second. So here's an example of Hong Kong Airport where we released this. So we got a satellite map, and then we've overlaid a day of positions on top of it. It's pretty cool because you can kind of recreate an airport diagram with the positions from airplanes. And you can see, obviously, runways and taxiways, the gates and stands. You can see the cargo area. So now to the point I made a minute ago, though, the value is what we do with it, right? We can't just say, we've decoded all these messages. Now you can track your airplane 1 per second on the ground. You're welcome, right? That doesn't actually help. Having positions on the airport surface is the first step. So what do we do? Well, of course, the value add was creating actionable decision-making tools and data. So here's a satellite map of Teterboro Airport, and here's what we did. And we did this at hundreds of other airports. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. There we go. So we drew polygons around all the FBOs, around the taxiways, the customs areas, all that jazz. And by drawing these polygons, we could now take the real-time messages from airplanes, 1 per second on the ground, and geofence around our polygons, and we know where the airplane is. We know where it's parked. We know what FBO it's at. We know if it's powered on, if the avionics are transmitting. More importantly, this is a breakthrough for general aviation, is we know when it left the FBO, so we know what the taxi time looks like. How long does it take if you're at Atlantic and you're departing to the south? What are the delays looking like at Teterboro today? Previously, general aviation only had takeoff and landing time, and so the rest was just a guess at best. So our first feature in making this useful for aviation was launching this as a service called Ready to Taxi. And basically, it allowed us to alert our customers about aircraft's movements on the ground, right? So it helped operators know if the crews arrived, if the airplane powered on, if it was taxiing. And the period before a flight is particularly stressful to operators, whether you're a charter operator, for example, and saying, well, we haven't heard from the crew, have the passengers arrived, what's going on, and they're texting and calling the crew, but maybe the crew's taxiing out. And FBOs just receive a disproportionate amount of phone calls saying, hey, have the passengers arrived? Do you know if that airplane has left yet? Because a lot of big airports, there could be 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes before arrival and arrival of passengers and takeoff due to those delays. So this was the first step, right? Taking all that data, applying some value in data science and geofencing, and then turning it into information. But what's next? There's an even bigger opportunity, being able to predict the future. It's certainly helpful to be able to say the airplane has been taxiing for 15 minutes, and typically it takes 25 minutes at this time. But what if we could have predicted that before the flight even boarded? What if we could have predicted that when you were doing your flight planning? So we already had takeoff times, but now with these takeoff times, we can really help operators figure that out. So we're using this today for taxi time prediction, and that's really helpful. It's helping people set expectations. But I think there's an even bigger opportunity. So for example, I think that we could spread the demand for taxi time by allowing people to determine what the impact of changing their departure and arrival time is going to be on taxi time at their origin and destination. So for example, someone might see, well, if we depart at 6:30 p.m., the taxi time is 20 minutes. But if we depart at 7:10 p.m., the taxi time is 6 minutes, right? So you depart 40 minutes later and arrive only 25 minutes later, right? So there's opportunities here to save on operating costs, which people are going to like, but that's actually going to move one of those 6:30 p.m. departures to a different time slot, and suddenly now the demand has smoothed out over the course of a day. So we think there's an opportunity to inform people about what's going on, airplanes taxiing. We think there's certainly people are saying, okay, now we know when it's going to arrive because we know our expectations are set. But what if we can reduce those delays? That's the exciting opportunity. That's the next step. So how does this all come together? So we see ourselves as a platform for decision making. It's a single source of truth that will distribute in any way that adds value to aviation. So it's website, it's mobile apps, it's APIs where people can develop their own software. Hundreds of companies are doing that. There's reports, there's integration. So for example, if you go out and look at how are airlines in different parts of the world operating their business, and you can say, well, there's a lot of people in that space. There's Air Inc., there's CETA, there's IBM, there's Airbus, for example, all providing software. Well, all of those companies are building on FlightAware's platform. So they're extracting value and they're adding their additional value on top of it. So we're all working together in the digital aviation ecosystem, and the end result is aviation's more efficient, it's more reliable, it's safer. You know, many people are consuming multiple different versions. So for example, you know, United Airlines is using our flight tracking data through IBM, provides that Windows application to them. They're also getting a data feed of all of our predictions. It's going directly into their operation systems for crew scheduling and gate management and reservations and all that jazz. Should we hold a flight, for example, if we think that another flight's going to be early or late? And if you pull up their mobile app, we're providing a mapping interface so passengers know where the flight is or family members know where the flight is. We don't care how they use it or consume it directly or through a third party. We're just happy to be able to do what we do. So outside of digital aviation, you know, this industry largely operates within the certified space. And the nature of that is just so fundamentally different from what FlightAware does, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, you look at the Silicon Valley, and the way that they operate is at the extreme polar opposite of operating in the certified and the regulated space of aviation. And actually, Facebook famously has a culture called move fast and break things. And it's not bad. Their point just is that their goal is not to have the most reliable system. They want to have the most innovative system. They want to have the most rapidly developed system. So that's, you know, really opposite of the culture of FlightAware. But those strategies are for different ends, right? There's no doubt that internet startups are, you know, more nimble and agile than an OEM in aviation, right? But it's different purpose and different goals. But you know, FlightAware intentionally sits in the middle, and it's really, really challenging because we want to leverage the latest cool technology and data science and web and mobile applications. But on the other hand, you know, people are relying on us to operate their business, their charter companies, their FBOs, their airlines, and so we really have to, you know, delicately balance that so we can innovate as quickly as possible, but provide that level of reliability. So one way we really have done a good job of balancing that is rather than making huge changes occasionally, so like an annual release or a quarterly release, we make very small iterative developments every single day, and we release the entire FlightAware infrastructure 4 times a week. So Monday through Thursday at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, we release a new FlightAware. And we're talking the flight tracking engine, the processing systems, the alerting system, the website, the APIs get released every single day. And the beauty of that is you can make these small iterative changes that don't have a high risk of breaking things, and it's also easier to manage what you're releasing and test it and get it out there. And then because we don't have a certification requirement or a regulation requirement, we don't need additional oversight on top of that slows it down. So changes that went into, you know, were committed to the code last week, go through a few days of testing, very small change, released, iterate, iterate, iterate. So it's not next quarter. It's tomorrow, it's next week. So unlike Facebook, which is move fast and break things, our motto is move fast and fix things. A lot of those improvements are just bug fixes and small improvements rather than major new features, which is great. But you know, beyond the pace, something that we've asked ourselves as we began growing in different directions was, you know, how did FlightAware become successful in the first place? Because you want to replicate that. You don't want to diverge from, you know, how we got where we are. So we asked ourselves that. And, it became clear to one of my very first points, it was because we weren't trying to start a business. We were trying to have a huge impact. We were trying to be awesome. We were trying to provide value to people. And we never really spent time thinking about how can we make money. It was how can we, you know, make people love using our app? How can we save people time and money? And we realized you can have a profitable business and new profitable products as long as you focus on the customer, as long as you focus on doing something awesome. You know, if FlightAware had started out by me saying, I've got an idea, I'm going to do the least amount of work possible to charge aviation the most amount possible, right? You know what that would have looked like. It would have been just a limited feature set that didn't work well and nobody cared about and nobody wanted to buy and use. If you can start out and say, I want to make the best thing possible that saves general aviation time and money, or I want to make airlines more efficient, if you could go into an airline and show them how much more efficient they can be, they'll pay you. You don't have to worry about the model or how you got there. Just have that impact and focus on that. It's a long game, and you can't always draw the line going forward. But if you focus on having a positive impact, on saving people time and money, on making it efficient and useful, you can have a profitable business. So I think another question is, how do you know what's going to save people time and money? How do you know it's cool? How do you know it's innovative? So our main goal with customers is be present. And we don't mean that just in the sense of showing up, which we do a lot, right? It's part of the aviation culture. You fly in, you show up. But I mean that in that we listen. When we go with a presentation, it's not to give our spiel. We custom create a presentation based on the conversation last time. And the goal really is not to tell them what's going on. It's to have them think about what we're working on and how it could be applied into their business, and they tell us. So we visit the customers, we let them know the roadmap, we talk about the future, and we inspire them into conversations. And so we have to read between the lines of what they say. We don't have them tell us what to do, we just listen to their challenges. We try to understand what problems they're having, and we try to think, well, is there some way that something we're working on in data science can help them? But we don't dictate to them what they should do, they don't dictate what we should do. And we try to avoid traps of customers, trying to encourage us to solve a problem for them. Because we run into situations where an airline might say, oh, you know what FlightAware should do, and we'll pay you, a lot for this is X. We have a vendor that does it, and we don't like them very much, and we want you to do it. The problem is, maybe we could say, okay, we'll do it, and we could do it 10% better than their current vendor, maybe for 10% less money, and maybe it's some more modern technology. But no one really cares if you're doing something 10% better or for 10% less money. What people care about is 10 times better. What people care about is 100 times better. We like to walk into a room and be able to say, you've been running the business like this. We have something that's 100 times better and costs 10% as much. That's innovation, right? If you're not doing it 10 times better, it's just duplication, we feel like. So I've got a kind of a related story about how do you know what should we be working on? How do you know what direction we should be going? So it's one of our major data sources. We operate the world's largest ground station network for ADS-B, about 33,000 ground stations in 200 countries. And it's a great example of playing the long game, of doing what's innovative, of doing what makes sense, and not necessarily focusing on just the money side, which came later. So in 2008, we started building ground stations and playing with ADS-B receivers. And we thought it was really cool, right? We could build our own ground stations, get an antenna outside, and start receiving positions from airplanes. Now, flash back to 2008, 2009, fewer than 5% of airliners had ADS-B out, probably less than that in general aviation. The hardware for our ground stations was about $5,000 each. Mean time between failure was about a month. And there was no commercial interest in buying the data from us. So this is FlightAware's business model, right? There's no data available, it's really expensive, it's really unreliable, and nobody wants it. And we were convinced this is great. And the thinking was, yeah, no one wants it right now, but it's so cool, right? The FAA gave us flight data, and we got flight data in Canada and parts of Europe, but we were realizing that we had plucked off a lot of the easy data sources from governments, and getting the rest of the world might never happen. It could take a lifetime. And it was always tough with different rules and compliance. In some cases you pay for it, or sometimes you can only distribute it to certain people. And we had this opportunity where we could get our own data and control our own destiny and have access to that and use it in all these different applications. And what was clear was this was the future, and don't worry about it, let's focus on it, and let's go from there. So fast forward now, and everyone in general aviation, business aviation, airlines, cargo, military uses this for flight tracking. But the key is, if we had waited until closer to the 2020 ADS-B mandate, if we had waited 5 or 10 more years until there was commercial interest, we would have been too late, right? The reason we were successful is because we began iterating and developing in 2008, and it started to become a real business maybe in 2015 or 2016. So this is version 10 now of these ground stations. They have Bluetooth, they have Wi-Fi, they're touchscreen, they're solid state, they're manufactured by partners in China. The cost is like $60 as opposed to $5,000. They never fail. And the key was focus on what we think is cool, what we think is going to be innovative, what we think is going to have an impact. And we couldn't draw that line back there in 2008, but looking back, it was clear. We focused on what was cool and new and innovative, and it became very, very impactful. So it probably raises a good question, right? Which is, how do you measure the impact of what you do or what you're working on when you're not thinking about what's the revenue next quarter, right? How would you measure this? So it's definitely much harder to run a business that's impact-oriented or that's enthusiasm-oriented because there's no objective measurement of that, right? Decisions are made based on potential impact to customers in years, not on our P&L next quarter. So we spend a lot of time talking about the what, the why, the how, and creating a culture of independent decision-making at the business, with the idea being that every day, every single employee is making 100 decisions, right? They might be very, very small, but they need to be on board with where we're trying to go, why we're trying to get there, and how we're going to do it. So one of the most important things that goes on at FlightAware each year is our twice-a-year town halls. So we do them in June and in December. And they're big events. We fly in the employees from all over the world. We do training and team building and all that jazz. But it ends with a multi-hour town hall where the company is just completely transparent about everything that we said we were going to do, how much of it we did, whether it be product, revenue, sales, profitability, everything, what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, and how each team and team member fits in to do that. It's the most important part of the business. But another part of that conversation is about explaining to the team about the impact that we're having. I could go up to the team and say, all right, we said we're going to hit these product goals and these revenue goals and these hiring goals, and we did it. People would say, oh, great. That's, they're happy that we did that. Certainly, they want the company to do well. But what people really like to hear is, what was the impact on the industry? What was the impact on travelers? So I have the privilege of being able to fly around and meet folks like you, go to airlines and have those conversations and hear about it. But most of the folks don't, right? They're writing software, they're developing software, they're fixing software. So to be able to go and say, well, remember how we were building the ADS-B network, and then we got it into our machine learning engine, and then we did the predictions, and then we got it into our API. All that has come together, and United Airlines is using that to determine when they should hold airplanes for people. And the result of all your work, the entire company, means that on potentially bad weather days, thousands of people will get home or get to their destination instead of spending the night at a hub, right? Because the airline operated more efficiently, because they were able to hold a flight when they didn't know that. That excites people, right? People wake up in the morning passionate, knowing that they're helping travelers. They're helping, whether it be commercial aviation or general aviation. That is exciting. And it ties back to the original idea behind FlightAware, right? We're enthusiastic about that. So we try to bring that home to everybody to keep them as excited. And what are people proud of, right? Is it how much the company grew in revenue or employees or offices, or the number of people that got home to their families on time, or the people who are tracking a loved one's flight, and so, oh, well, they didn't arrive at the airport, but I see they deviated around weather, so everything's okay, they'll be here in half an hour, or someone who landed and diverted and didn't have cell phone coverage. Those are the things that keep people happy at FlightAware and keep the culture alive. But we ran into a little bit of a challenge, which was when I started FlightAware, it was me and a few friends, 100% pilots, total airplane nerds, and a culture of aviation. So business grew like crazy, and we kind of looked at one point and said, wow, only about 6% of FlightAware employees are pilots, and of those, almost none are current. And you don't have to be a pilot to work at FlightAware. You don't even have to love aviation to work at FlightAware. But it's tough, to have a company that people don't really have a direct connection to the industry. So example, and this is a big problem for aviation. This is huge. Imagine if 5% of people at Apple had iPhones, and only about a quarter of those people used them. Like, what do you think the product would look like, right? Aviation sees this across the whole spectrum, right? Which is, in general aviation, it's time consuming, it's expensive. You get into the, manufacturers of business jets. Very few of those employees are customers of the business jet. And even in commercial aviation, you see it, right? A lot of the airline employees, they don't book travel on the same site that you and I do, right, on United.com. They have an employee booking system. And so the employees tend to be very kind of distant from the customer experience. So, what are the reasons why FlightAware employees aren't becoming pilots or staying current? Well, if you were here for the presentation about half an hour ago, we see all the challenges that the industry's facing, whether it be finding instructions, scheduling, obviously with the impact of COVID, we have cost, we have airplane availability, all these challenges. So we decided we're gonna fix that. We're gonna bring back aviation into the FlightAware culture as this passion and excitement. So we started a flying program. We reimburse people for financial reimbursements for flying and training. We funded an independent nonprofit that's now a flying club based in Houston that owns an airplane that's available for really low-cost training that FlightAware further subsidizes. And we created a culture around flying, around flyouts, around $100 burgers, and all that jazz. And it's just been tremendous. So, for example, making it easy. Aviation medical examiner. People say, oh gosh, I don't know how to find a doctor. I don't know, how to schedule this. I don't know how this all works. Made an arrangement with an aviation medical examiner in Houston. He has a scheduling system we can use. He can bill us directly for any FlightAware employees that go there. We have days where we'll operate a shuttle bus to and from his office, taking 6 to 8 people at a time. Everybody gets a medical. FlightAware pays for it. If you go to your own AME, send HR the bill, we'll reimburse you. You want to do a discovery flight, FlightAware pays for it. You get a BFR, $350 on your next paycheck. You solo an airplane for the first time, $500. Get your private pilot's license, $2,000. Monthly stipend of $150 a month to spend on flying, whether it be flying your own airplane, learning how to fly, flying with a friend. It's massive subsidy, and the results were incredible. We had tons of discovery flights. Almost everybody's got a medical. We've had people go from 0 time to CFI in under 2 years. And the culture impact is beyond my expectation. Not only do people understand the lingo of aviation better, but they understand the why. Why would an airline experience a delay? Why would an FBO have this challenge? We've had new products come out of people who, 2 years ago had never been in a general aviation airplane, who now totally understand it, have feature ideas and requests and product ideas, and then the flyouts, right? So this is a picture of a flyout we did, and a bunch of people, rent airplanes, own airplanes, take the flying club airplane, all meet up for lunch, and not only are people talking about the product, they're saying, hey, did you file to this airport? Because we got a diversion alert, and they're using the product, they're talking about it, they're finding bugs. But just the team building and the camaraderie, it's just so awesome, and it's just so fun. But we identified another gap. After doing that for a couple years, we realized that there wasn't enough IFR training going on. We were producing a lot of VFR pilots, but not very many were taking the next step. And lots of the instrument-rated pilots weren't current. So we got a Redbird TD2 simulator in our office. Simulates a G1000, 172, 182. We got the 4-flight integration, which works great. So instrument pilots can log flight time in our office. Private and instrument students can get with a CFI in our office and log flight time, and it's free. So it's in a workstation in our Houston office, and any employee can either go fly it or reserve it on exchange, like you're booking a conference room. And it's free, and people love it. So we got a flying club, a flying program, a flight sim, and it's deeply helped the culture and everyone's understanding of what's going on out there. And we've made the industry and our software just more accessible and convenient. So I think there's a lot of opportunity across all of aviation to really look at your companies and say, is there an opportunity either to embrace aviation more within our organization or help others do the same, like Redbird did to help FlightAware? Best money we've spent. So, one benefit that I was talking about in digital aviation is the rapid development, and the continuous and iterative improvements. And I mentioned that as it relates to Silicon Valley and, how people think about. But a big problem at FlightAware, I'm sure we see this everywhere, is good's the enemy of great, right? So trying to define when a product is ready, when it should be released versus, keep working or get it out there. And, one thing I keep telling people is if I waited until FlightAware was ready, right? Like totally ready, let's release it, we would not have released it yet, right? And this is 17 years later. The deal is the goalpost keeps moving, and that's a good thing. You want, what we're working on today to just be worthless in 10 years from now. You want to be innovating and building on top of that. And so we released the surface movement product I talked about, and I showed the polygons and the geofencing and all that jazz. And there was a lot of conversation about, well, how many FBOs do we need to have support for before it's ready to release? But we wanted to release it at NBAA, and there was this conflict. Do we push it back a year? So we released it with 178 FBOs, which is a lot, but not a lot in the grand scheme of how many there are. And then we told people, hey, if you want to add an FBO, come by our booth, or email us, or if you work in FBO, help us add your FBO. Well, guess what? A week later, we had 1,000. So it took us about a year to get to 178, and then a week to get to 1,000. And so the point of that is, the faster you release, the faster you get out there, the more you're transparent with customers and partners, they'll give you feedback and help that you didn't even know was possible. So we like to get it out there, get feedback along the way, and not operate within a vacuum. And I think another reason is the industry changes, right? When we look back at when FlightAware started, this is before most people had the internet on their phone. This is before the iPhone and the iPad. This is before ADS-B was out there. So you got to just continually release, continually innovate, just be out there as fast as possible to get feedback from the industry and be able to leverage the latest tech. Skate to where the puck is headed, not to where it is right now. And the puck is not headed towards saying this is where an airplane was 2 minutes ago, which maybe is what FlightAware did at one point. The puck is headed to the future, right? Creating ways for people to benefit from predicting the future, moving up the value chain and saying everything that we've built up until now is our foundation for the future. So this is an industry with a lot of players, and I think that the best opportunity is for everyone to work together, exchange information, collaborate, integrate, and I talked about all the vendors that take FlightAware's API and provide it to airlines. I talked about information that we receive from others, whether it be government or private. I talked about, well, we have a Redbird simulator that integrates with ForeFlight, which integrates with FlightAware. This is an opportunity for people to come together, leverage the latest tech, and the end result is more pilots, more aviation, more on-time flights, a better, safer aviation and travel experience. So I'm proud to be part of it and excited about the future. And finally, when I put together slides for an industry event, I like to look back at a similar type of presentation a year ago, because I am just always amazed at how far we've come, FlightAware industry since then. So when you're doing releases every day like FlightAware, that's great, but you don't even notice the changes, right? It's like watching paint dry or ice melt or something. Like, it's so minute you could never tell. But everything we're building is leveraging what's going leveraging what we did in the past, and it allows innovation to happen faster and faster. And I think the key is to accept that today's innovation is tomorrow's commodity, which is a great thing. What's amazing today should be totally commonplace in the future. And the leaders in the industry will still be innovating and leading the way in tomorrow's innovation. So, we've got that going on. Airplanes and avionics and the industry advancing faster than ever. Digital aviation is bringing technology and connectivity to aviation, and general aviation is seeing some of the largest growth that we've seen in decades. So, glad to be part of it, excited for what's next, and thank you so much. Happy to do questions if you have any.
We're going to try to turn the lights up just a little bit because I'm sure some people have some questions. It's always great to catch up with you and learn more about what you're doing. As you were describing the many ways in which FlightAware is being used, I wondered whether, you don't have to name them, but whether there's a flight training organization, be it a flight school or university, that you've seen that is doing some particularly innovative things with FlightAware information.
Yeah, what we're seeing is an opportunity, it's a debrief opportunity, and it's the opportunity to analyze data. So speaking of exchanged information, there's companies like Cloud Ahoy, for example, that offer the opportunity to really in-depth analyze training flights, any flights, and they can provide information on the stability of approaches. It's essentially like a FOQA type system for general aviation. And they can take data from whether it's your ForeFlight export or your G1000, but also they can take a Google KML, like the Google Earth export, which FlightAware provides. And so we have seen people be able to take the data out of FlightAware and apply it into apps like that provide education and safety opportunities. And the cool thing about that, beyond sort of going back to my digital aviation ecosystem, is this is data integration, right? We recognize at FlightAware that we have a bunch of different apps, right, and services we provide. And for all the maybe 20 different products we have, we're solving 0.5% of the industry's problems, right? And I'm not saying, oh, we want to get to 100. What I'm saying is maybe that's, we're good at 1%, something that maybe that's a good goal. And we're going to work with partners for that remaining 99% because you can't be everything to everyone. And my goal is let's just be neutral and work with everybody, and then they can find uses and bring it to flight schools like you're talking about, which it's just great because candidly, it's no extra work from FlightAware. We have the data and the technology, and people can apply it in ways that isn't our area of expertise.
I think one of the lessons learned with modernizing the air traffic control system was the FAA would do something and celebrate it and, great innovation, only to have some of the airlines go, well, it doesn't do much for us. And what you discovered is they all had different metrics. So what was really good for the FAA and what we thought was an achievement turned out wasn't all that interesting to some of the airlines, and others benefited from it. So
that's right. And a challenge too is that the FAA and others are creating these with great intention, but they expect the airlines to take on all the R&D budget. And I think that's shifted a little bit because one of the challenges was the FAA releases something, Canada releases something, maybe the Paris airport system releases something, Heathrow releases something, and the airlines are saying, we're trying to operate an airline, not the world's biggest IT department. And so if you can have these digital aviation players integrate all this and provide it in a unified way and kind of abstract all of the single aspects, then airlines can integrate with that piece and then decide what's valuable, to your point, right? They might say, well, we're not even going to use this program, but maybe some of the data is available to them. Or maybe the airlines will say, well, we're going to delay a flight. It gets pushed to an airport they didn't even know was receiving the data. And the end result is that, rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else out there? I don't know if you can, here's one. Look at a mic. If you can turn the lights up a little bit, I guarantee Daniel cannot see who's asking the question. But we know you're out there.
Over here. I have a question regarding the taxi time. I think students and flight schools can actually benefit from it. We have situations at our airport, which is a very big flight training airport. We have multiple schools, and we all push at either 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and we have a big lineup. Obviously, students are paying for that time that they're taxiing. Is there going to be a product that we can use as a flight training provider?
Yep.
Not at the United budget?
Oh, well, then the no is the answer. No. No, absolutely. And in fact, one of the cool products that came out of the FlightAware Flying Club and the flying culture is a service called FlightAware Aviator. And FlightAware Aviator basically takes all the innovations that we've brought to business aviation on the data side to general aviation. So it's essentially taking our FlightAware Global program, which is for biz jets, and makes it available at a very low cost to general aviation operators. And I was really excited about it because FlightAware started out for people tracking me in a 182, and it was a little bit of a heartbreaker that we had made all these incredible innovations over the years and hadn't brought that in a way to the original market for FlightAware. So we actually just launched that at Oshkosh last summer, and it's available to individuals as well as to fleet purchases, with the idea being that, to your point, people are operating general aviation piston aircraft in a professional commercial environment, and they need a lot of the same tooling. So it removes some of the international logistics and some of the stuff that some of our biz jet operators have, but it brings in all of that predictive technology, surface technology, controlling access to airplanes, filing the equivalent of VFR flight plans on FlightAware for short hops and all that jazz at just a real fraction of the cost. So that's FlightAware Aviator.
Anybody else?
One right here. There we go.
My name is Peter Dittmer. Been a flight instructor for 30 years. Two questions. Are you a publicly traded company right now?
So FlightAware, we weren't for a long time. So Collins Aerospace acquired FlightAware last year. So FlightAware is part of Collins Aerospace, which is owned by Raytheon Technologies.
Oh, okay, great. So my question is this. Being a Facebook or Meta, whatever it is, stockholder, their stock just went down 30% because of issues, what I understand to be data being collected on individuals. In this environment, do y'all like sell data to other companies and like Big Brother kind of thing, or from an interest point of view?
Clear. Yeah. So there's a lot of there's a lot to say about that. First of all, FlightAware recognizes that we're in service to the aviation industry, and we are in service of the aircraft owners and operators. And so the data that we provide is really with their support, essentially. And so by default, data that's available on FlightAware in general, right, for flights that are flying around the airspace, if someone says, I don't want my airplane, I don't want my fleet available, we can take it off of our system for free. That's a phone call to us. It's a phone call to some of our partners like FAA and others. And when we take it off of our website, kind of digging a little bit more into your question, that means it's not going to others as well, right? So we'll sell a report, for example, to FBOs that are analyzing investing in a new market, or we'll sell a report to an aircraft manufacturer who's trying to see fleet utilization. If you've called us and said, I don't want my airplane on your website, it's not in the reports. It's not in the data. We'll include some anonymized aggregated data. So if someone says, well, I want to know all the flight hours of G650s by month, et cetera, we can just aggregate all that and give hours for that aircraft type, but we're not going to list the tail number in there. There's sort of another part, which is there's ADS-B has presented some additional challenges, right? And we've seen this in the news lately, which is there are operators like FlightAware that operate very, very large global networks. You tell us you don't want your airplane to be observed by our network, or maybe only provided to you. We can do that, but then people are saying, well, hey, if you can make a $50 ground station, I can make a $50 ground station. I can see where your airplane's going. So for a long time, the FAA really was able to control access to data. Now it's freely available. So we've worked with FAA and GAMA and NBAA, and there's a new program that's out called PIA, so the Privacy ICAO Address Program. And fundamentally what it's doing is, if you look on your registration card from the FAA, it's got that 24-bit hex code. Here's your ICAO 24-bit code, and that's programmed into your transponder. It's not what you type in. It's the behind-the-scenes thing. And when you're emitting ADS-B or Mode S, you're sending out your 24-bit code. And so people are able to decode any message and know what the tail number is. So the PIA program lets you go to the FAA and get a different code, pseudo-random, right? It's totally unrelated to your tail number. You can program that into your transponder, and that gives you the opportunity to operate anonymously. Now, there's some challenges, right? It's a pain to get that changed. Sometimes it's a maintenance action in your transponder. Currently, it's only for domestic U.S. flight operations, but it's a step in the right direction. And so we're working with our customers, and first they say they don't want to be on the website. Done. We can also say, well, we can provide the data directly to you. That's step one. And if you're having challenges with ADS-B receipt of your data, you can change your transponder code. And FlightAware might know your transponder code and can provide that data to you, but it becomes much more challenging for somebody else. So we're in the business of assisting operators and not in the business of selling it for purposes that the operators wouldn't like. Thank you.
To piggyback on his question, what does FlightAware do about data security? I know in the last couple of years we've had a lot of issues with data breaches and payware and all this kind of thing. So what do you guys do about that?
Yeah, so basically the question being that maybe combining the two concerns. You can say, well, FlightAware might have these policies, right? But we're also concerned about all this other information, and people have even more than just flight tracking data. People have their personal information. People provide their credit card information, and if they're a customer of ours, and then people add friends and family and spouses and relatives to their accounts to receive flight alerts, right? And you want to have that information be secure. So that's a tremendous focus for the company, and we recognize you essentially get really one shot at that to do it right. And so it's a focus of our IT folks, and so we have not only people who are focused on security, but we have an entire infrastructure and design around it. So all of the personal information is held on actual FlightAware servers and not part of our cloud processing, with a lot of rigorous controls and encryption and firewalls. We also have audits, both in terms of policy audits that we go through, as well as external, what they call penetration testing, where people try to break in and provide different recommendations and ideas. So we do that both in an automated capacity and in hiring people to do those sorts of things. FlightAware passes the PCI, which is the payment card industry standard for storing credit card data. And we have what's called a bug bounty program, which is essentially a way where if people identify any potential problem, we'll pay them for that. And this is something that you commonly see, whether it be from United Airlines to Apple, which is trying to encourage people that you talk about ransomware and payware. You don't need to operate unprofessionally and have some hacker group trying to attack a company. We'll say, hey, if you identify any sort of problem, there's a bounty program. We'll pay you for it. You tell us about it, and we'll fix it. Most of these are trivial. It's not about consumer data, but there's little glitches. And like my point about iterating, our idea is you fix 500 minor things over the span of several years, and you've come a really long way. So it's an important emphasis for us and something that we've managed to do pretty successfully.
Got time for maybe one more? Anybody else? All right. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Appreciate it.